Okay, I'm ready.
And stop and tell me.
It's going.
Okay, Stephanie, we're all set when you are.
All right.
Can you switch with this stuff?
There we go. I'll call to order, I guess, the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission agenda, or meeting, sorry, I was reading. It is October 14th, 2021. It is approximately 5:33. And so we'll do roll call of members.
Kate Murphy. Fred Wolf.
Here.
Rob Ebert.
Yes.
Aaron Grodinsky. Stephanie Dahl.
Here.
Tori Leviton.
Here.
Chelsea Scott.
All right, we'll do the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, for our audience participation, I don't have.
I don't think we
We
do.
don't have anyone signed up.
All right. There being no audience participation, we will move to
Sorry.
approval of the September 9th, 2021 minutes. That should have been in everybody's packet. Sorry, I just realized I hadn't turned anything on.
You're okay.
Okay. So, has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? No. So if I can get a motion.
I move to approve the minutes from September 9th. Am I not allowed to, am I supposed to sign it?
I'm sorry?
Since I presided over,
You can motion approval.
okay.
I need for a minute. Do we need a second?
Mhm. Yes.
All right, can I get a second?
Second.
All right. So moved and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained. All right, so approved. Is there any unfinished business? None that I see on the agenda. So we'll move over to new business. And first is the relocation of the cruise series to John B. Park.
Good evening, Chair Dahl, members of PTRC. Before you tonight for consideration is a request from the Cherry Hills Art Commission for the relocation of the cruise series. The sculptures are currently located at the southwest corner of Quincy and Holly. The commission has discussed relocating the series since 2018, but decided to hold off requesting permission to relocate the sculptures until after the John E. Park redevelopment was complete. Now that the park is reopened, the commission would like to relocate the series to the area between the southeastern pond, which is the pond closest to the horse arena, and the gravel parking lot. If approved tonight, the next step is to take the request to City Council for final approval. Staff is happy to answer any questions the commission might have. We also have Commissioner Shelly Smith available for questions as well.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any questions? Is there anything you'd like to present?
I'm willing to take any questions. I just want to tell you a little bit about our motivation. It's over on Holly and Quincy, and it's a little congested over there, and we were hoping to have a little space for these objects, and especially near school and near where people are walking by, that they could stumble upon it and just wonder, where did these pieces come from? I know a lot of children in my neighborhood in Charlevoix, they talk about, are they from space? Are they buoys? And it really kind of triggers a conversation about adventure and space and SpaceX and NASA. And so we just thought it would be a perfect place to have, all sorts of people stumble upon them and really enjoy it. And the artist is nationally and internationally known. He has a studio in Rhino, and if they like the pieces, they can learn more about the artist, and that's always fun to engage with the community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a comment. We've interacted in the past with different requests on behalf of the Arts Commission, and we've had some discussion, and I've tried to encourage us to think a little bit about what the role is to work more smoothly with the Arts Commission so that they don't go through, efforts that they think are appropriate, and that because we're the PTRC, they come to us and we might not like the idea, or we might not like the proposal, and it seems like an awful lot of wasted effort. And we've talked in the past about having art in the park that is pursuant to this request. The master plan, when we looked at it, my recollection was that people did not want a lot of art in the park. This is a piece or a series of pieces. I'm not really sure what the role is or how we're gonna, once we start, do we get a lot of these type of requests? Is this something that we think is appropriate to have in Mead Park? Do we like this particular piece of art? All those things that, I don't know, if maybe we could have a work session or something like that. It just seems to me like this isn't the smoothest way to have this come before us. I know that there's been some discussion in the past that when it was over on Bellevue and Holly Street, people didn't see it, and there were a fair number of comments that some people didn't think it was worth seeing anyway. And they were happy when it moved to Holly and Quincy, but it was still, I don't know if it was a merit of the quality, and it's kind of rough for us as PTRC to evaluate the quality of art when the Arts Commission is really the experts and chartered to help us, but we've never really talked about how to appreciate and integrate all of the work that the Arts Commission does, because by definition, all of your work has to go in open spaces within the village, which unless it's in right-of-ways, it's going to be in parks. And we've never really talked about whether or not that's the right thing to do or not, and so I toss it out to everybody's thoughts.
I guess I would kind of pause right here and say, for the time, the question is whether this piece of art is going to relocate to John Mead Park. I'm not saying, Commissioner, you're not incorrect, and maybe that's a discussion that we can put to have later and how that transition works, but I think what is in front of us is the relocation of the Cruise Series to the John Mead Park. I don't know, Emily, if you're...
Yeah, I have two questions
Yes.
for you.
Uh-huh.
Are children allowed to play on these?
They are allowed to touch them, and they are sturdy. The artist doesn't want kids climbing on them, so they would be away from the playground, and that was intentional so that they wouldn't look like they were play pieces. They're more, further away, and they're supposed to appreciate them close up or far away.
Well, because of the location in proximity to Mead Park, I can't imagine that children will not climb on these. That's
And we
unnatural.
know that. We've anticipated that, and when we move them, we're planning on, refurbishing them and making sure that they are sturdy enough to handle, exposure to children.
Okay. Second question is, these are only here temporarily, correct? We don't have these forever.
No, these are donated pieces, so they're part of our permanent
We have them forever.
portfolio. And I just also wanted to address, with the Mead Park, the residents here have talked about that they wanted a more traditional piece to be in the park, and we've been fundraising and looking for a piece that would be a significant, robust piece to honor the park. This is just a side piece. We feel like the park is big enough that it can handle one other small piece. And, all of us are volunteers. A lot of us are artists and collect art, but we do have a person that we pay, Kendall Peterson, that tells us if art is worthy and kind of gives us a background of an artist so that when it's donated, it is a significant piece. And, she shared with all of us, and we all have our personal, art that we like, but sometimes we don't like art. And that's also serves a purpose in a community, that some people cannot like it, and it just starts a conversation and does it have value and is it important? And this artist is recognized, so people can love it or hate it, but also it kind of gets people talking and it's exciting.
Well, the whole, I have many opinions about the Arts Commission, and I feel like I need to keep those to myself.
Well, and I'm new, so I'm learning about all this.
But the whole thing is very subjective, right? I mean, what you think is art and valuable, I wouldn't agree. And I just hope that the village just takes a little bit of a more slow approach to this. We don't need art in every single open space in this village. The nice thing about Cherry Hills is our parks and open space. And I don't think we need this art. The horse is wonderful out here. Everybody agrees with that. And I wish it would have all just stopped with the horse, but that's just my opinion.
Right, I mean, the horse has increased in value quite a bit, so it's been a great investment. The piece out front here, I didn't particularly like, and I thought, oh, it's whimsical. Then I listened to the artist's apprentice talk about it. Come to find out that he was a professor at DU. He's known for mathematics and engineering and is a master of color theory. I never knew that. He's had pieces at the White House. And then his other piece over at Quincy Farm is completely different. And I never knew that. And so because I didn't like it, I paid attention and I learned more about an artist. So I understand how you feel. Art is very subjective.
Is there any intention to put anything in the kind of open space that's at Quincy and Holly?
No, we don't have a plan to replace it.
Okay.
My only comment is, art is entirely subjective, and I think these I know where they are, I got past them all the time. This park is huge, I think it's just a little, as long as Fred said, it's expected that it's not gonna be like fenced off, that people are gonna be able to interact with it and be like kind of organically part of the park, I think it'd be a good idea.
And we felt like the park was big enough that it could absorb a piece like this, and it won't be blocked off. What it's supposed to be like is if you're just walking along and then you see, where did these come from? Did they fall from the sky? So I think the park is a perfect place for them because the park is so huge it can absorb different objects.
Question, that was, maybe I can ask Jessica or Emily. I'm trying to remember the specific part of the master plan that talked about art. And I don't know if we had designated an area of Mead Park as subject for, approval for art.
There isn't a specific place designated. For PTRC's reference, the Art Commission does have money in the budget for next year to start looking at a piece for John Mead. And I think that process is probably something that we can have that conversation about that you're referencing, Commissioner Eber, that about how that process should work with PTRC, deciding what dedicated piece should go into the park. But in this case, it's really just a question of, can this piece be moved into this section of the park?
When you're talking about dedicated piece, is that something we purchase or is that something that's donated and given?
It would be something we would purchase.
Because personally, I feel like before we start purchasing art for natural beauty, this area is given, and to me, it's art in and of itself. I'd much rather see, I've said this before, but more recreation, like pickleball court, something that brings people to the park and gets them using the park. I drive by this every day. I don't see a ton of people out here, and I go by this every day, probably 16 times a day. So I think I have a pretty good take on what takes place just by going back and forth and on Quincy. And I personally would, before we purchase a piece of art, I'd rather see us do something that would bring people to this expensive park that we put together in the first
Just
place?
for PTRC's reference, our commission has its own budget, so this isn't parks money that's going towards this art. So if you wanted to add something to the park with parks funds, that is certainly some, an option that's available, but they do have their own budget for this. So it's not an either or, I guess is my point.
Which I understand is 25,000 a year
For
the arts budget.
It's 21,000. This year it was a little extra, it was 31 because they asked for an additional $10,000 for the John Mead Park piece that they're actually going to ask to carry over into next year because of COVID and some other things that they were focusing on. They didn't have a chance to pick a sculpture, so we're asking city council for 31,000 next year.
All right, so the motion, there's a recommendation, obviously, on the back of page 2 of the memorandum provided by the city. Does anybody have a motion?
I'll move, and you can see that. I move to recommend that city council approve relocation of the crew series pieces to John Mead Park in the area between the southeastern pond and the gravel parking lot south of Mead Lane and northwest of the equestrian arena, as shown in Exhibit A to the October 4th, 2021 staff memorandum.
All right, is there a second? Second. Well, I need a Robert's Rule of Order refresher. If there's no second, can I go forward?
I don't believe so, no.
All right, do I have any other motions?
I guess I want to know more. I want to know that if this is going to come to John Mead, and here we have Aaron now, but if this is going to come to John Mead, if this is going to be some interactive piece that the kids can actually, to me, if it's going to be in the park where this is a park for mostly children, that it would be an interactive piece, that it would be something that the kids could climb on, and I guess that would be and I don't know how that could be added in there, that language, but I guess if it's gonna be located here, I wouldn't wanna see any sort of parameters around it, that it couldn't
There won't be
actively play
parameters.
on it.
I do think, I'll echo Commissioner Murphy in that the whole park is designed as kind of this natural habitat that children may climb and jump and run around on. And so to have something in the park that we're going to reinforce it so that if they do, that's one thing versus to say that, like, I think it's there, it's kind of like a free-for-all, like, so to speak, that the rest of the park is without having any sort of either sign designation or roping it off. Our commission understanding that this is just going to be just like the log out there, that, because I'm looking at the pictures, I can tell you that I have a 5 and a 7-year-old and they will climb all over that. They will think that that is part of the park, just like the playground is, and so it is a concern that I would have in terms of preserving what it is, that it is art, without any sort of, if there's not gonna be any sort of kind of signage or anything that, and I don't know that we want signage, that's not what I'm suggesting, but if it's just out there, they're gonna climb and jump off of it.
I think the artist's intention when he designed the pieces were obviously not to have children climb on them. Now that he has requested that they go in a different location, and obviously he understands that it's a park, children will be climbing on them, so he is aware that the children will be climbing on them. Again, like Commissioner Smith said, he just didn't want it right next to the playground to make it seem like it was a toy or it was part of the playground, just more on the opposite end. So he is aware that they will be climbing on them. It just wasn't his original design intention.
What's the diameter of the hole?
Of the hole, well, there's 3 pieces.
I see 2 holes.
Oh, of the hole?
The hole in the piece
It's like
on the
a
left
dip.
and the middle piece.
It's
Yeah, it has holes at the top. I don't know what the diameter is of the holes in the pieces.
So are those hollow inside? That's what the hole's for? Is that someplace somebody could
I
put,
don't,
They're not hollow.
Like we'd bury like some rock in there.
can somebody put trash in the hole?
they can do what they've done with it on Holly and Quincy. They could put trash in it, they could put their arm in it, they could put rocks in it. It's
Oh,
just,
how deep is it then? I thought-
it's not very deep. I mean, it's not like you could put your whole arm in it.
Yeah, they're more,
It's like shallow.
yeah, Jeff, if I'm remembering right from seeing them, it's more like a divot than it is like a hole into the center of the
Yeah,
piece.
so the kids could use it as a step,
They could.
yeah.
Which is fine.
That's what would occur to me immediately.
Mhm.
That's what you're gonna use it for, huh?
That's what I'm gonna use. After I put my beer can.
Commissioner, let me ask you a question if I may. I want to understand a little bit about the process that the Arts Commission went through in making this recommendation to start with, that it should move at all. And secondly, that it should move to this location versus anywhere else in the park.
Do you want to speak to the history of?
A little bit of the process that the commission went through, again, some of it was before my time. I didn't start until the end of, or the beginning of 2019 with the commission, so they'd already begun discussion. They felt that the corner of Quincy and Holly, nobody was really viewing them. They wanted to have them seen a little bit more. I don't know if they considered other locations before coming to the park as their preferred location. Once I got on, they had already decided about the park. And I know, unfortunately, Commissioner Smith is newer, so we don't have that background information from 2018. But they decided, once the redevelopment was done, that it would get more people would be able to see it, and it would be more visible. So ultimately, that's what they decided.
So when I think about various locations, the various art installments around our city, I think of kind of the various entrances where there's a lot of traffic coming in and out. And Clarkson and Quincy comes to mind, where there's that, I don't know, it's like a mining cart or whatever. And so to bookend it at the other end of Quincy at Happy Canyon, where there's also sort of an area that could be used for something like that, or the various issues we've discussed about kids climbing on it within the park region, maybe that would be another option to consider.
Can I just chime in, because I don't know, Jessica, did you, sorry, I was saying hi to Kathy. Did you talk about Kendall helping choose this location in the park? Because that might be helpful.
Well, she walked their art consultant walked the park
I walked with her.
Jeff, and chose the location in the actual park. She didn't consider the corner that you're talking about, Commissioner Brzezinski. I think they have some, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the commission, but they have some other locations in mind for some other pieces, but they didn't necessarily consider this piece for any of those other locations aside from the park. If that makes sense.
You follow up on that comment right there, that they have some other locations for some other pieces. Are you talking about within parks?
Not within
Or this
park,
park?
over where they used to have the rounded sort of Ferris wheel looking sculpture, that was at the corner of Quincy and University. They're saving that location for maybe another art on loan, sculpture that might come in. So different locations that they have, and then possibly the other corner of Quincy and University where we have the flower garden, sort of in that area as well. So not necessarily a park, but more prominent areas in the city that they have earmarked, for lack of a better word, a place that they could put a sculpture.
Well, and where I'm going with that is I want to know whether there were other places within Mead Park that are hoped for places to have art. Because at some point, we're going to have to say, what is the limit of art? And then the question comes up of that this is our sort of central, main, prestigious central park. And while I have looked at Mr. Colligan's resume and see that he's got a lot of shows and some recognition, I don't know whether or not that is of the caliber that deserves placement in our central park. I mean, Charlo is world class. is this, and I'm sorry that I can't tell you that I'm really super knowledgeable about Mr. Colligan. I know he's a Colorado artist. Is that why he's in Cherry Hills? Or, I know we try to focus on local artists, and that's a good thing. But, you know, if we're gonna start using our central park for a art installation, I think it really needs to be special. And I just wonder whether this piece is that type of an artist, is that type of a piece? And that's why I wanted to know what the art commission, if the art commission, I'm not gonna do your job and I don't wanna do your job. You guys have talents and skills that I can never do. But I wanna know whether or not you guys thought, my God, this is a great piece from a great artist that really deserves a central prominent, because as everybody's coming off the trail behind it, it is a popular place. It will get a lot of use, and it will get a lot of viewing, which is good too, for the reasons that you mentioned. But I think we have to wonder whether or not there's a better piece for that location.
And we're looking for a very significant piece to put in the park, and, you know, the residents have talked about that they wanted a more traditional piece. This is, you know, a series that we do own, and we felt like it was a more appropriate venue to be over here. Kendall advised us and said that it needed more space to look like it fell from the sky, and that's why we thought the park was big enough to allow for it. And so that was our intention. We own the piece. We think the piece is interesting, and we thought a more appropriate space would be over here on the side of the park. It's not going to be, you know, right in the middle. It's just kind of a little side caveat.
Did you say you own the piece? Did this ever come before PTRC to say the
No,
art commission
because it
is
wasn't
considering
placed.
buying this piece?
It was
And what,
donated.
No, because the art commission can accept pieces
I think,
and put them in rights of way. They don't, not all of the pieces in the city are within parks.
I think one
Okay.
thing we just need to remember is for PTRC, they're the art commission, their job versus our job, and I understand there's an overlap, but I also think that, you know, their job is not to come tell us what the park should look like for their art and vice versa, and so I just as a reminder of where we are all at as sitting up here as commissioners on this commission, just kind of moving forward, but, I think one of the questions I would have, and I think that you had said it earlier, and I don't know that it got answered, but is this, I understand Kendall's recommendation that she wants more space for this one. Does the art commission believe that this is where this piece should go? Or is it, well, we just don't want it here, so let's move it over here, or should we wait and find a better piece for John Mead Park?
We walked the park and we felt like it was a great place for this. And I also want to let you know, we get art offered to donate all the time, and we vote on it and we decide if it's worthy or not. So it's not like that we will be coming to you with all sorts of donated pieces of art that we want to put all over the village. This is something we felt like it was significant and accepted the donation and felt like he was a worthy artist. I just want to assure you that we're not going to clutter the park with a bunch of...
does the art commission, do you try to locate one piece per year? Do you have a schedule like that, or?
We do the sculpture on loan, and like the James Searles piece, The Walking Eye, I mean, he's a world famous artist, and that was a coup that we were able to get that. And we did on loan for just 2 years, and we paid him $10,000, I think. And so it's just a 2-year loan just to give the residents exposure to different art pieces. Then, like the piece right out front here, Gilberto, we paid for, and we wanted, and that was an expensive piece of art, and that is on our permanent portfolio of art.
What about like Three Pond Park, has a lot of space for something like this? Could fit the criteria of looking like it fell into an open area, but I mean, not necessarily take a marquee spot in the park here as we've referenced.
It's a great idea, especially since we had to take out some of the other features that had fallen apart.
Yes.
And that's why we were coming to you. So, so you can decide that it's not appropriate, and then we can look for another spot. I I mean, you know, we continue to talk about the best place for things, and we obviously want to make all the residents happy.
One more question, are these pieces, can somebody push these and roll them around?
No. They'll be secured. They can't be rolled around. They'll be as secure as they are over on Quincy.
How are they secured?
Well, a lot of times you do cement legs down into the soil, like multiple feet. So the artist knows how the appropriate way to secure art.
Okay.
That won't be a problem.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about the installation for this piece, though. Do we envision that it will look like this, where one of the pieces is in native grass, one is in gravel, and one is in something else? Or-
These are just example pictures, so this area of the park where they're shown is just native grass, so they would all be placed in native grass.
Okay. And the artist is okay with that?
Yes.
And Jeff, does that impact your ability to, maintain the park the way you need to?
No, and that's why I walked the area with Kendall. So we picked out several different spots, and this is the one that she felt was the best for exposure and, the best spot for it. So, yeah, it's not
Jeff,
gonna
did you
impact.
guys go to Three Pond Park at all?
What's that?
Did you go to Three Pond Park?
We didn't,
Okay.
because, that wasn't mentioned to me, so, yeah.
I mean, I'm curious, as I'm sitting here looking at this, I think that the area sort of around Allen Huddle Commons, if you're talking about that it generates a lot of interest and a lot of questions, and you're trying to generate the youth of the village to have that inquisitive mind, and the Huddle Commons is geared for concerts for young people, in memory of a young person who used to like to perform. I'm just wondering why, or whether or not somewhere around the Huddle Commons is a better location or as good a location. Better because it's sort of geared towards young people already.
What?
We can take back any recommendations, Three Pond or Ellen Hutto, back to the commission and get their feedback and see if that's something that they'd be interested in. The commission did not talk about Ellen Hutto or Three Pond, so I can't say how they would respond to those suggestions.
I would mention that over down in Hutto, once we get grass established over there, our plan was not to mow more than a couple of mower passes around the trail. So I don't think the art pieces out there would be very well, but they would be covered.
Because they're low on the ground.
Yeah, I think the highest one is 2.5 feet or something, so they're not huge.
Okay.
I personally would like to go look at these. You said they're on Quincy and
Holly.
Holly. Okay. I haven't seen them. I don't know why I haven't seen them, but I haven't. And I feel like I have a better understanding, kind of. I mean, I don't think, if this decision doesn't have to be made tonight, if we could table it, I mean, we didn't even get it beyond the first motion.
It is on the city council agenda for the next meeting, so it is a little bit time
Okay.
sensitive.
Sorry.
If the commission does decide that they should be in another location, it will have to go back to the art commission, but it would be really helpful, if the commission gave some direction one way or the other this evening.
I support Kate's suggestion. I'd like to see him too. I've never seen him.
Well, you gotta come up towards my neck of the woods. I see you drive past them all the time.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that it's on the council agenda, but we don't have to make a decision because it's on an agenda for council. I mean, let's be clear that we have the ability to make our reasoned decision. If we vote to table it, it will come off of their agenda, I assume.
It would. And I feel your resistance, so of course we don't want to push this. We want to make people happy, so that sounds like the right decision.
I feel like I would like to see, I like Aaron's suggestion of Three Pond Park, because we don't have anything, and if the art commission is focused on putting kind of a signature piece in John Mead, I you know, the whole purpose, I think, is to have art in our parks and things like that. We don't have anything over there. Now, I don't know, I will be the first to tell you, I'm not an art connoisseur, and I'm not here, I'm not on the art commission, I don't know anything about whether it would look good or not there. But I think it would be fun, and Highland Canal has such exposure for our community, with people walking past and everything, and so I think seeing pieces of art and making people talk and seeing that we have art in our parks as they walk past, I think, I really like that idea of Fremont Park, but that's just me. I don't know if anybody else feels. If somebody wants to make a motion, go for it. If not, I don't know, I don't know how you want us to proceed.
It's up to the commission.
Does anybody have a motion?
I make a motion, we table this until the commission has had a chance individually to go to Holly and Quincy and see these pieces of quote-unquote art.
Can you add a date of the next meeting to your motion? That's helpful for agenda setting.
In other words, we just like it for one meeting.
So that date will be, hold on,
Yeah.
And maybe add that we suggest that perhaps the art commission consider other potential locations in the meantime as well, such as,
yeah. Emily, the next.
November 11th.
It's Veterans Day. Are we having a meeting?
Yes, I've not made sure that we have a quorum, but we would still hold.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure. All right, Fred.
Okay, now we're starting over.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, I make a motion that PTRC table this item until we've had a chance to go and look at it, and that we should do that before November 11th. And that the Art Commission, PTRC would suggest the Art Commission also consider Three Pond Park as an alternative location for this piece of art. Is that enough?
Yes, thank you.
Okay?
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Me?
Motion carries. Is that what you needed, Emily?
I'm sorry?
Is that what you needed? Do you need anything else?
No.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners,
Good night.
for being here. We appreciate it.
Appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you for your time.
On to additional new business. We have the municipal code updates to chapter 11, article 3, city property, parks, and rights of way.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica and Shanley.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay. So this is the second time that PTRC has reviewed this issue. These are a lot of the code changes that PTRC talked about in concept at the June meeting. And during that meeting, PTRC had recommended changes to allow waiting in the splash area at John Meade Park and Woody Hollow. And did not recommend changing the park hours to dawn to dusk. So the hours in this suggested code have not changed. They're going to remain 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. So I worked with City Attorney Gackenberger, who's here tonight to answer questions too, to draft appropriate code language based on PTRC's recommendations, and also to update some of the other sections with minor changes for clarity's sake. So the red line version of the code is attached in your packets as Exhibit A. And the updates also incorporate some suggested edits that Commissioner Eber had emailed to staff separately. So I'm not going to go through every change in the code. I'm just going to run through the substantive changes, of which there are 3. The first is that change to allow swimming, to not allow swimming, to allow wading in the splash area at John Meade Park and within Little Dry Creek in Woody Hollow. So what we're planning to do is install signs in both areas in accordance with this new code language, once it's approved by city council. The next change is the parking or camping section. So this section's been clarified to explain that parking is to be contained in designated parking areas. It also removes the requirement to obtain a permit prior to setting up a table along a park or along a trail or park. I am specifically requesting PTRC's feedback on this section, which I'll come back to later, but under the existing code language, you're not allowed to barbecue or grill in any park without obtaining a permit from the city manager. So this is a question that I'll come back to at the end and specifically ask is whether park users should be able to come barbecue on an evening without getting a permit to do so. The last major change is to the alcoholic beverages section. So per city council's discussion at their July 20th study session, this section has been updated, so now it includes an exception for events held by the city in John Meade Park or Allen Hutto Memorial Commons, so that we can have city events in those spaces in compliance with state and local liquor licensing laws. Alcohol will continue to be prohibited in all other situations, so third parties can't pull a permit to have alcohol in those spaces, and the day-to-day, it will still be that alcohol is banned in parks and trails.
Sorry, can I just ask a question about that?
Sure.
So it sounds like that was discussed in tandem with conversations we've had previously about sanctioned events rather than held by the city. Like, so if you want to have something in Allen Hutto and you get a permit from the city, blah, 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 blah. So is that off the tables rather than held by and sanctioned by the city, it's just held by?
Yes, so it's only city-held events, so it can't be another nonprofit or a family reunion, of residents that live in the city. City council did discuss this during a study session at length and went back and forth, and they ended up going with that more conservative recommendation that it should be city events only.
Emily, your first red line there on page 1, that's only for people, right? Has nothing to do with dogs swimming in the creek.
Correct, that's only for people. Okay, so the feedback that I'm looking for from PTRC is that question from earlier, if you should have to pull a permit in order to grill, or if it is preferable to PTRC to recommend up to council that people should be able to just come and have a cookout. And then really any other comments that you have on the suggested changes. And I'm happy to answer questions.
With respect to the question of grilling,
Yes,
right now, there's no fires that are allowed in any of the parks.
that's correct.
And so what you're really asking us is whether or not that type of fire, i.e. grilling, is acceptable within parks.
Without getting a permit from the city manager. So right now you could have a cookout as long as you had a special event permit, like if you were to reserve the park shelter. But the question is, could I just show up on a Wednesday night with my little charcoal grill?
But
Without
what I'm
running.
going is that it's important to say that that permit though is only for certain areas, am I right? I can't say I want to have a grill in the space where we were just talking about this art installation, and I'll bring my charcoal grill down there. Because I don't think that that is something that you can even ask for a special permit for. The only place that a special permit would apply is in like the play area or, a hard surface, I guess I would call it, or maybe I'm wondering whether or not we do have that limitation, because it sounds to me that,
I guess the question is, if I went and I said, I want a barbecue there, Emily, I'm applying for a permit.
Yeah.
Is the permit restrictive of, go ahead, Stephanie, we grant you a permit, but you have to do it in the little commons area right there? Or is it just to John Meade Park and wherever I want to drag my little grill, I get to go to?
Yeah, we don't have anything that's that specific, quite frankly, right now, that would limit it just to the park shelter.
I guess where I'm going with that is I have a big question about fire concern,
Sure.
about it being anywhere in any of these areas. I had made a comment that, you know, while I don't know that grills and charcoal and natural gas fireplaces are the right thing, I do wonder about whether or not a solar oven is something that's an acceptable use in an oven, because it's cooking food. And so I said, well, that one seems to be okay because it doesn't come with the attendant fire or as large of a concern with fire. I know you're concentrating energy to be able to cook food, but for some reason, if you were trying to bring a bunch of kids from 4th grade and have science day, look at, I cooked an egg with this solar oven, they seem to be in violation of that code provision. And
So for PTRC's context, of all the permits we receive every year, in the past year and a half to 2 years, kind of strange because of COVID, but even pre-COVID, I have not really gotten any requests from people asking to grill, asking for a permit to grill. It's really more, the discussion that we were having at a staff level was more, do we want to basically inconvenience people a little bit if they want to have a cookout and have them go through that permitting process or not. But I don't think we need to get into that level of specifics because it's just not something that's that common.
What happens at Wash Park? When they go to, you see people grilling all the time there. Are they just because those are set little stand-up grills that you put charcoal? I don't even know exactly how you do it, but I see people grilling there all the time, and I also see people drinking there all the time. So I'm just curious how that works versus.
I think you reserve those. My understanding is you go through Denver Parks and you would reserve like one of their little pavilions that has the grill in it. Now, the reality is whether it's allowed versus enforcement, I think are probably two different things in terms of like people just pulling a grill. Because I see people pull those little levers like in the park, and I honestly don't know if Denver Parks allows that you can do that, or if just nobody enforces people to not do it. So, I mean, I think my two pieces of feedback on this would be one, I think with whether you do a permit or not on the grill, you need to restrict where grills can be. Because we don't just want people anywhere. And then number two on that, I think because alcohol is not allowed in the parks, I think you should get a permit. And here's why. You need to educate people that alcohol is not allowed in a park. That is not going to be people's belief and go-to. So if they think they can just go and grill, they will bring alcohol. Exactly. So if you want to stop people from drinking, you need to educate them when you give them the permit. That's my feedback.
That's a good
I
point.
would just add that I really don't know how many people we'd be upsetting in aggregate if we just banned grilling in parks. I mean, I can't fathom that this has even come up one time in the last decade, really. Like, people want to leave the backyard and drag a grill to the parking lot. I just err on the side of conservatism.
And then without beer.
Yeah. Like, really? Like, that's the thing? People want to grill in Johnny Park?
Fancy cake, I know.
But I do recall, at one point there was discussion about whether to have a fire pit within the center part of the park when we were first doing planning at the very beginning. In order to have, stories and everybody sitting in those aerobic chairs that were donated and things like that. It really is a question of whether or not, you want to have the ability to have community space. Is a fire an essential item? I would be more comfortable with them using installed facilities that were put by the city in certain places with concrete around them. Since we don't have those, my sense is that fire is too much of a risk and shouldn't exist in the park. As to the drinking question, we had pretty vociferous discussion here in PTRC, and thought it was a good option for the other people to give the city the only right to have it for city functions. Kind of a wacky compromise that excludes opportunities for people to come into the park. I guess we spent a lot of time saying, how do we promote people coming to the park but being responsible? And that got us into the question of what kind of alcohol. You know, I guess as a first step, my belief is limiting it only to city-run functions and seeing how that goes is probably an okay thing, with maybe a placeholder for considering it later on.
Emily, do we know what Greenwood Village's position on things like this is? Like in DeCovenant Park, a big park, lots of facilities, including picnic pavilions. And I'm thinking there are grills at those picnic pavilions. So they allow them.
Yeah, so in cities where they are providing the grills, typically you just need a permit to reserve that space. Obviously, I know in Denver it happens that people don't reserve it, and they just use the grills. But since we don't have those facilities, it's really up to the commission, and then the city council to decide what the regulations are.
The big distinction I see is all of those parks, Kentucky Park, all of those parks are actual parks with sporting facilities, which we have purposely made a decision not to have in our city. And so when you're playing soccer and you want to grill a hot dog, that's one thing, but if you're just going on a nature walk, you're probably not as compelled to, fire a full party.
And I think that is another, my recollection is that Greenwood Village does allow alcohol in their parks as well. So I think the point about the two being related is a good one. So maybe, I think what I'm hearing from the commission is not a huge desire to start allowing or encouraging folks to bring grills or to grill in parks. So I think what I'm hearing is that we should keep the code the way that it is.
Yeah. But I do have a question of what happens if a science class comes with a solar oven, because I was the one who made a comment that something like that should be okay. It's not an open flame. It takes a special skill to kind of set it up. Would we as PTRC be okay with somebody coming and grilling a hot dog in the middle of Mead Park using a solar oven?
Yes.
We just not force it, really.
Right, where are we gonna?
Yeah, I think that's such a specific example that I can't imagine putting that in language. Let's just keep it simple. No beer, no alcohol, and no fires, period. In any of our parks.
Yeah. Right.
Agree.
Sorry, so yes, that's basically what we're doing. There is just the exception that we could issue a permit at some point for some of these activities. But in all likelihood, that's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, well, when we have in the past years, the winter celebration out here, we have a huge bonfire. And I know that's a special situation where it's well supervised, but that bonfire's been very popular in the past.
They're small. We don't have a bonfire. We have fire pits, which are in the parking lot. So technically they're not in John Mead Park. But yes, that is an exception, and it stays in the parking lot for a reason.
Right.
Kathy, can I ask you a question?
You can.
In regards to, I know Emily just said that, we can leave it as it is, and that if something special comes up, they can come and ask us for a permit. Is there any language already set out that if, I don't know, I gotta be in my bonnet and I wanted to come ask to do this, like, what's the criteria? Because I think that's where sometimes we see, we had this happen a little bit with like the right-of-way permits, that someone in the city years ago made this exception, and we don't see that there was a lot of kind of bumpers around how they made that decision, and then we're trying to undo something that was already done, and now we're starting with, I don't know if there's precedent around grills, to be honest, but at the end of the day, is there anything written to guide the city if somebody comes in? If we're gonna make an exception that they can grant for the grills, then where is it written on how they make that decision?
So, the current code provision on this says it's unlawful to blah, 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 or to burn or cook within a park or trail in the city without first having obtained a permit from the city manager. So that is not being changed. And then there is a delegation to the city manager in section 11.350 that the city manager is authorized to promulgate an administrative policy and rules for public parks and trails. And right now it involves, the scope of the authority for permitting is use of space limitations, rentals of facility within the city parks and property, as well as permitting of special events and group gatherings, including criteria and approval and administrative process. So it allows the city manager to adopt a policy that addresses all of those things, that allows it to be more flexible and more responsive to citizen inquiries and concerns, but yet documented.
Okay.
I guess my question is do we want the city manager to have that discretion, or do we want to say no fires in the park?
While you're pondering that, I wanted to ask the commission for one other bit of clarity, because we're talking a lot about the fires, and that is the item of feedback one. But I heard leave the code maybe as it is, and there is another revision in this 11.390 that clarifies the parking prohibition to allow it in areas designated for public parking. So wanted to also just clarify that if you say no changes or whatever, that, you know, we've also had this other change proposed in there.
I guess maybe I would put this to Emily. Are there situations that people apply for permits?
In general, for
To grill or do whatever, like are there events that we have? Instead, because I think what we're all thinking of is like Aaron's gonna go down and grill. Because now that he's talked about it, he's gonna do it. But, you know, are there events that are held here, or something that maybe the elementary school has, or the fire department has, that that's where it comes into place? We want to allow those exceptions? I guess I'm just trying to figure that out.
Historically, there haven't been. I'm not sure that we've received any requests to grill that have actually like become a permit. Every once in a while, someone will call and ask questions, but not, you know, complete the permit process. Part of the reason we're checking in on it too is because we didn't have this park shelter in the past, right? So that's a change that might invite more of those types of events. But we haven't had requests that I can think of in the past.
Thank you.
I think my only comment would be is if you are going to continue to allow the discretionary issuance of permits, I would like to have that categories of considerations for the city manager to include that if it includes a fire of any kind, it needs to be on appropriate surfaces and it needs to be with, you know, fire extinguishers and the like, and give them some criteria that specifically says, you know, address the fire risk appropriately.
All right, I know, Emily, I know there's a recommendation here. This is going to city council in November. Is that, so we're looking for a motion? Is that correct?
That's the plan.
All right.
We're approving all of this additional language.
Maybe, you don't know. That's what we're gonna figure out, but yes. I think probably it might be easiest for purposes of this to go one code section at a time, rather than trying to rewrite. So,
Sure.
I guess I can make a motion on the first one that I move.
Oh,
What?
sorry.
No, I can't.
I'm sorry, for clarity's sake, are you going like section by section?
I was just gonna do, section 11.370, because I think it's, I guess unless anybody else, like, does everybody feel like we're just gonna rush, say yes on all of these?
Because there are,
Because there's
so
some,
the,
that's fine, we can just do that. I just would like feedback before.
Well, it might be simpler, I mean, if we get consensus and direction section by section, yes, but one motion to.
Got it.
wrap the whole thing up.
Right, to
Okay.
recommend approval as discussed and directed.
Okay, so as it pertains to section 11.370, swimming or wading prohibited, the changes proposed by the city, is there any consensus recommendations, any feelings on that? We'll do a motion at the end, but any input to provide.
Okay.
All right. Great.
Well, we're limiting this to John Meade Park and Woody Hollow, so if there were any water in the Highline Canal at specific times of the year, are we saying that you can go ahead and get in the Highline Canal? We're-
No, it will continue to be unlawful to swim or wade anywhere except for those 2 designated areas for wading only.
In fact,
No.
we've expanded all the kinds of water you can't get in, except for
All the
these 2
water.
places.
And again, to remind everybody, we own Quincy Farms, and so historically, I guess if you were rafting on the Highline Canal, floating the Highline Canal, because it is not considered a park, you'd be in front of Emerald Water's rules and regulations, but take that for a different, but you could arguably do that, and it wouldn't be in violation of the city code. But when you come on to Quincy Farms, you would be violating the city code because it is not either John Meade Park or Woody Hollow Park. And similarly, if you then took out portage around and then went back onto private property or a pond that is at Fred's house, you could swim again because it's private property and it's not part of the city park.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, the whole point of this is to just acknowledge that now we have some authorized waiting areas and to not hang people up, for a violation of the code when we specifically carved out that option in 2 places the city
You
is
can put a
deemed
play
safe.
area and they should be able to use it.
It's a vanity yeah, but it's huge.
All right. So, Emily, I can give our feedback on that. We're in consensus with it. Okay. Specifically as it pertains to section 11.390, parking or camping. So except when a valid permit is issued by the city manager specifically allowing such activity within a park, trail, or city property, it is unlawful to, one of the changes is section A, which is park motor vehicles except in areas designated for public parking. Is there any feedback on that particular line item? Okay. B, camp or to place or erect any tent. It looks like we have removed the word table and left in bench, trailer, or any structure. Is there any feedback or thoughts on that?
Yes, I have a comment. Does this language, Kathy, take into account our homeless problem? If somebody comes in right now and sleeps in one of our parks, doesn't pitch a tent, doesn't camp, they're just sleeping there.
So I have checked with the chief of police, and she has confirmed that this is not an issue right now, and she is satisfied with the way the code is written.
And the park's closed at 11, so I can't see why we're.
Also that.
They can't tell time.
I would also, I don't know
Police
what the
gun.
definition of camping is somewhere or wherever, but I don't think you have to have a tent to camp. So,
That's
you
correct.
can sleep somewhere.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, what if you're quote, camping during the daylight hour? Then you have to figure out what camping actually means.
So camping is right now a very hot issue, as you may know, in metropolitan areas, and it is the subject of a lot of litigation. I've analyzed the provisions here. I've analyzed the services available to the citizens and residents of this community and its environs. And right now, I have no reason to believe that the code as written, including with these revisions as left in place here, are in violation. And as I said, the police chief is completely satisfied with how it's written for purposes of her enforcement needs.
Okay.
Okay, and then C, make or allow to burn a fire or to cook by any means.
Oh, there's your soul. Oh, Robbie.
The Rob exception.
So just remember, this is pursuant to a permit exception, right?
Yeah.
So if the school wanted to not use its grass and instead come over here to set up solar, and they'd have to get a permit from the city manager to do that.
And then they could do it if the city manager approves it.
Do educational institutions have to pay a permit fee?
Yes, right now, the way that, the administrative policy is, they do. It's $25.
We just spent $100 on socks for one for shopping.
Most permit fees are kept nominal, but they are to account for staff time in processing, and they directly have to track by law the cost, that staff incurs in monitoring and processing the permits.
I guess I would delete the last 3 words by any means. I think we're allowed to burn a fire or to cook.
Why would you?
Because that implies that it's by a fire. And it leaves open other means.
There's no sous vide allowed in parks. Sous vide?
Anyway, that's just my comment.
I think I'd probably prefer to leave it all there, only because by any means, people are quite creative. And so when we don't have by any means, they get creative and say, well, you didn't say by any means, therefore I can do this. It's not specifically laid out in the statute.
I could go the other side and say, it says it's illegal to cook, period. No matter what it
You
is.
could, but if someone flicks their bic or, uses some infrared something or other, I think by any means, by definition, is more broad and sort of puts paid to the question.
All right, any other feedback or thoughts? All right, as it pertains to section 11.3.120, alcoholic beverage, it is unlawful to consume any alcoholic beverages within any park or trail within the city. And then what has been added is with the exception of events held by the city in John Meade Park or Allen Hutto Memorial Commons in compliance with state and local liquor licensing laws.
It's the smallest step forward in prohibition, but.
Any feedback, thoughts? I think, Rob, you had kind of added in there that you would like the feedback to be that this is step 1 towards maybe least restrictive. Is that fair?
Well, just acknowledgement that PTRC was going to be broader.
Mm-hmm.
And still continues, I think, to think that way. Just a comment.
I can pass that, I can include that comment in, the memo going to council.
I agree. All right. Is there any other thoughts, feedback on that? Okay. So can I have a a motion?
Staff recommends that the commission I move to recommend that city council adopt changes to chapter 11, article 3 of the Cherry Hills Village Municipal Code as outlined in exhibit A.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. All right. Okay, that should complete new business, unless I'm missing something.
That's it?
All right. Reports. We'll start with Aaron.
I do not have any reports.
Rob?
Emily mentioned it already, but the meeting that was going to be the Citizens Advisory Task Force that was set for October 20th, was it? 29th? Has now been rescheduled. It has been canceled and rescheduled for, I believe it's November 10th.
I'm sorry, I am not involved with the CAT very much, so I'm not
I can-
sure, but
I
it
can
will be
bring it up on my-
it will be on the city's website if anyone would like to check.
At any rate, the meeting that was scheduled that day has been rescheduled for approximately 3 weeks later to allow people that get better, more comments and to digest them and put forward suggestions for what might go into the master plan. I think the bottom line was at the open house that was held, I believe it was last week or the week before, there were 36 members of the public who attended, who were not otherwise either on the CAT or already on a commission or something like that. I think they thought that that was an okay turnout, but would love to have had a lot more. And delaying the meeting allows for a little bit more public comment. So I encourage all of us to provide your comments and get other people to know that there is more time to continue to provide comments. And really try and get a handle on what it is that the master plan ought to be.
So,
Rob?
I'm sorry, just to jump in because it's so very related and I don't want to bounce back and forth. Every single household in the city is going to receive the master plan survey probably next week. They're
That's
being
correct.
mailed out today and Monday. God help us.
Yeah, I mean, there's no
Everyone in
question.
the city is stuffing envelopes, literally everyone.
People are busting their
Park
ass to try
staff.
and make sure that there's good public participation.
So so every household is going to receive this survey. There's also a QR code in the survey that you can complete it online instead of filling it in. But it contains questions about parks and open space, about what you feel the definition of semi-rural is, about transportation options. It's really everything that you could think of pertaining to the master plan. So everyone is going to receive one of those in the mail.
Emily, have you seen the survey?
Yes. So much that I wish I will never see it
Okay.
again.
I have a question.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is you or Rob, but Rob, you made a comment some time ago about a questionnaire that was somehow being circulated within the village regarding people's ideas for the master plan. Is that correct?
Apparently, it was what I think it was that was circulating turned out to be the draft of this questionnaire that
Okay.
is now going out.
Okay.
It is not something different or kind of a pretest for it or anything like
Okay,
that.
I understood that on that original questionnaire, there was a question, and I don't know exactly how it was worded, but it said something to the effect, how do you feel about a roundabout at Colorado Boulevard in Quincy?
No, there's a question in it that asks about different types of traffic calming measures. And it asks residents to rank, so it gives a list of traffic calming measures and asks residents to rank them, like one, I think this, or I don't know which direction it is, but like one would be, this is the best idea, put 18 of these everywhere. And 5 being, I hate this, please never install one in the village. So there are things like traffic, like stop signs, speed bumps, roundabouts is one of them, but it's not proposing a roundabout anywhere, it's not saying specifically a location. It's gauging residents' feelings about them. And apparently it was a very heated discussion at the CAT, at Planning and Zoning, they went back and forth. So the question even acknowledges at this point that the village sadly projected a roundabout in 2017, and it says that in the survey, and it's basically asking, we want to gauge whether the feelings are the same or if they have changed in the last 4 years. So,
Okay.
but it's not proposing a roundabout in a specific location or at all. It's asking, what are your feelings about them?
Okay. I'm anxious to see it.
We're anxious to get them out of here.
Is it the same as the online survey?
I'm sorry?
Is it the same as the online survey?
Yes.
Okay. I did take some time and thought to get through it.
It's
So
long.
we'll see what citizens are willing to actually put time into.
Yeah.
Additionally, and again, I don't want to step on Emily's report, but I wanted to thank Emily, all of the staff, Pamela, and Pamela again, for the outstanding car show that came together recently. We had a number of cars, and 90% of those cars came in the last week, I bet. And-
Including Rob's.
Including me, that's right.
Thank you.
And the amount of hustle, dedication, organization and professionalism that went into putting this thing on was outstanding. We're lucky that if you're a car aficionado, that there are lots of things to look at and see. But more importantly was the organization and the community event and people coming together and enjoying the fact that, I must have heard the comment 1,000 times, it's nice to interact with people. It's nice that the village was able to put this together. So, one thing that was different this year was that y'all didn't have to do the cooking because of COVID precautions, and my recommendation would be is that whatever you did this year, do it every year. Because it saves you guys a lot of grief. But I wanted to say thank you on behalf of all of us residents. You guys killed this thing. It was great again. Besides that, it's not really related to our PTRC type of work, but as I was picking my vegetable garden and getting ready for the frost tonight and the freeze, and thinking about all of the different places in the village that I saw many people with huge apple trees that were full of fruit. The amount of waste that is going on as a result of those things not being picked is unfortunate, and I would even dare I say shameful. There are people who will come and pick your tree for you, perhaps as part of one of its educational and food initiatives. Maybe the land preserve could get involved and have programs, but I would like us to think that as part of the open space is the ability for people to use it. We are in a fortunate community that has resources. It is a crying shame that all this fruit is going to get ruined by tonight's frost. If you have any of those trees that are unpicked, go home and pick them even though it's cold. Call your friends and have them make sure they pick their trees. And then in the future, let's try and figure out some programming, maybe either city notice or just even a blurb of advice to get people out there to not waste, whether it's apples or any of the food stuff that can be picked. Let's see what we can do. Other than that, thank you to all my commissioners continuing to address all these different issues. Emily, will your report address the Tuesday night? Because I didn't participate in the tabled matter on P&Z for the trail over in Cancerville, but that will probably be going forward to council, and I encourage all of us to participate there.
When will that be on council?
I don't want to steal your thunder, so I don't.
Oh.
That is also scheduled for November 2nd and November 16th. November 2nd is a public meeting, so you can go and speak during audience participation if you'd like about it. November 16th is the public hearing where there will be audience participation specific to that item, and where the bulk of the discussion is going to happen. Typically, council has been for first readings. I don't know really how to explain it. Council has been having the bulk of their discussion at second reading rather than first reading, it gives people more time to sort of find out about it at first reading and then hear the discussion at second reading, so that they don't do all of the discussion at first reading and people feel like they've missed it, and then get to second reading and hear a lot of public feedback that might change things. So if you could only make one or the other, I would encourage you to get to the November 16th meeting if you're interested in it, since that's where the bulk of the public comment and the discussion will happen.
That was November 15th?
16th.
16th.
Commissioner Murphy?
No.
Commissioner Hall?
Yes. Jeff Roberts and I rode around in his slick little ATV, and we figured out all the signs for the Woody Hollow Park Trail. Whether you're walking from Woody Hollow to the to right here, or from right here to Woody Hollow. So those signs have been ordered, and the posts go up next week, Jeff tells me, and I will join he and his crew when all of that actually goes in the ground, just to make sure everything is right. And I've also started work on the Cherry Trail. The field work is all finished, so I just have to finalize it and pass that on to Jeff. So the trail signing project continues. That's all.
I'd just like to thank Fred real quick, I'm sorry. Thanks for doing that, but at the same time, I want to reiterate my comment from a lot of other meetings that there are lots of places in the village that don't have trails in them. And I have encouraged us to consider formalizing some other trails even where they do not exist, so that all the pieces of the village have trails.
I couldn't agree more.
Vice Chair.
Yeah, thanks so much for your work, Fred. Two things. I did go to the land preserves trail walk and manned the table for most of it. I ran home to get my Stetson hat because it just was so sunny. And other than that, it seemed very successful. There was a lot of people going through, a lot of people asking questions, introducing each other, making friends. And I do like this kind of common interest in values of open space and stuff. So I believe it was a success from their perspective. From my perspective, we did end up, I talked to maybe 20 different residents and non-residents who use the Highland Canal or other trails regularly, to find that common values between so many members of our community, which we kind of rallied behind that rather than bigger than our small little differences. That's on the trail walk. The next thing was I attended Denver Parks and Rec Zoom outreach for programming ideas. And I thought it was very interesting that they did that. They had the budget, it was sponsored on social media. There was about 100 participants. Denver Parks and Rec owns like Mount Evans. The scope of what they have to work with is so much more enormous than what we have. So I don't see us programming snowshoeing, for example, but I do see a future for us to include more diversified programming in the future. So thanks for, you all know this, I've been saying this since I got here. I still want to see more programming, maybe even pickleball. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. And I do think that we've had conversations that have popped up about the word recreation. We talk a lot about parks and trails, and so I think kind of trying to put that on our radar and maybe getting the feedback from the survey with the master plan would be really helpful. And if Emily, when you all get that, and within a couple hours or so, we get out, no, I'm just kidding. If you could put together kind of the parts that are appropriate for us in terms of as they apply to the parks and trails and the recreation piece of it, because I think that keeps popping up, and we want to have what our residents want. And so how do we, I think getting that information would be helpful for us in terms of what we're looking to do moving forward. So I think that would be really helpful. I was not here last time. I just want to say thank you for the 75th plus one hard work that you all did. It was really fun. We had a really good time. Even though it was blazing hot. Yeah. But it was so lovely. So thank you very much for all of your hard work on that. I know you probably want to talk to us a little bit about canceling Winterfest and a couple other things, so I'll turn it over to you, Emily.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's the first order of business is that we are canceling the winter celebration. I sent everyone an email, we let city council know. So far the feedback, we've only received positive feedback from city council about that, because with the COVID situation and it being little kids and it being in the winter, there are really just too many different variables that could send us in a really bad direction. So we're disappointed about it. It is a really fun event for us to do, but we think it's the safest option for the city this year. So we will very much look forward to having it next year. All our fingers are crossed. For I'll try and go in kind of order. For the Cantato issue that went before planning and zoning on Tuesday, planning and zoning, I quote, reluctantly moved to approve the vacation, and it did pass 3-1. So their recommendation for approval will go to City Council on November 2nd and 16th. The 16th is the major meeting to make, since that's when it will be a public hearing. And notice of both of those meetings have been mailed to all the neighbors. It will also be posted on site, and it will also, for the November 16th one, be published in the Village newspaper. So to try and get that word out as required because it's a public hearing. For the master plan, yes, I'm not sure what the timeline is to get those surveys back by and how long the consultant is going to take to process them. We're very grateful that the consultant will be entering all that information and synthesizing it for us, but I'd be more than happy to bring all of that to PTRC, and I'm not sure, there might already be a plan in place by community development to bring that and present it to you, but if not, I certainly can. And I think that'll be great information for PTRC to have going forward about, especially what people's definition of semi-rural is. I'm really interested in that one. So we'll bring that when it's ready for us. And then my last update is about Quincy Farm. So I did a presentation to City Council on September 21st with Deputy City Manager Jake Goldie about different options and possibilities for Quincy Farm. Not so much a plan, just like a menu of options. The purpose being not for council to choose any that night, just sort of to explore what the possibilities are. Cherry Hills Land Preserve also presented that night. The recording is all available on the city's website if you're interested. And then City Council, again, wasn't making a decision that night. It was really exploring options going forward. So their consensus at that meeting was to start working with the Land Preserve, to start putting an MOU together, and basically to start taking steps to activate it in a more meaningful way. So we are starting to work at the staff level with the Land Preserve to work on a draft of an MOU, and then taking some steps in the interim that might just make things simpler to work together in terms of issuing permits and more housekeeping things. So we are meeting with the Land Preserve for the first time because it schedules this week. So there is not a specific council agenda that Quincy Farm is scheduled on going forward, but I will update PTRC when that MOU, there's actually a draft MOU to start looking at. So.
Thank you, Emily. The other thing I was going to ask, and I know I'll wrap this up, I do think that it probably is a good, with regards to the art commission,
Mm-hmm.
You know, they pick the art, it's not what we do, but I feel like there might be a better way to do it versus them coming once they pick the art and they come and be like, here's where we want to put it, because it feels like we've like started, we've like got the train going, and then we're like, whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
Like a better way.
In this case, this is art that they had that they were looking to relocate, so this is kind of a funky situation. I agree for the piece that they're looking at for John Mead, and we've had this conversation at a staff level, how the two commissions can work together earlier in the process so that they're not choosing a piece and then bringing the piece to you. Because that makes it really difficult, especially when it's the dedicated piece for this park. I'm sorry?
Yeah, we just don't like the.
I mean,
Yeah, it just felt uncomfortable. It was just a really uncomfortable presentation, I thought.
off the record, I think it'd be perfect with John Mead Park at the bottom of the pond.
Yes, that's exactly.
That's where it'd be.
Well, that's, so in this case though, in this case though, does the commission have a suggestion for what your preference would have been in this case? Because I just don't know, I'm sorry?
Give it back to the artist.
I like to.
No, but I mean, in all seriousness, because the art commission went through this process of they wanted to move it somewhere, they looked at different locations. They worked with their consultant and they preferred John Mead Park.
I think part of it would have been, I obviously don't want to create a situation where we're just spinning our wheels all the time. I think efficiency for volunteer positions is always key. I also think though that it didn't sound like we didn't get presented with other options. Like it was like, here's where we want to put it.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of our option, or take it and come back to us with better options. Whereas I think if they come in and said, here's where we identified, and maybe they looked at Three Pond Park and there was a reason it didn't work,
Yeah.
but none of that information was presented, so it's very hard for us to say, okay, this is the best location, when we know of all the other locations we have, and we just don't know what considerations were.
And then what's the liability too of that? Like, if say you're not gonna be able to keep kids from climbing on that thing and then they fall off the top of it or something happens.
Get
And,
their arm stuck in the hole.
yeah, I don't know. I just,
It's already in a public place. The liability doesn't change whether it's
okay.
that property or John Mead, it doesn't.
But I do think that it is important that while, Sherry, you mentioned you don't want to be involved in picking it, the reality is, however, that PTRC is sort of the citizen advisory group for what happens in your park.
Yeah.
And if you hate the artwork that is being suggested, you probably don't think it's appropriate to go in the park. If you love it, you probably think it's great. But I guess my question is, you know, if somebody said you don't get to comment one bit, that's the relationship that the city wants. That the art commission picks the art, and you get to say what the location is or isn't. That takes out all of the discussion about whether you like it or not. It focuses it entirely on, is this a good place for that piece? We bleed over and we talk a lot about whether or not we like the piece. And that's one of the awkward things about what goes on between the Art Commission and PTRC. That can be smoothed or reconciled, or, you know, it needs to be. But then the other piece is just, you know, if somebody comes in, as I tried to ask that question, and as you just said, what process did you come through to say that's the right location for it? There's gotta be a little bit more involvement than we think this is great. And then the other part is, as custodians of the parks, you know, I really do believe that Cherry Hills is truly a special place. What works in other places may not work here. And, you know, I do think this is crossing the line and getting a little bit involved in the Art Commission's work, but, you know, I looked at the guy's resume and it doesn't seem to be world class. And I think Cherry Hills wants to be a world class place. And that would, you know, that's just my personal opinion about the piece. I'm not saying I don't like it. I just don't think it rose to the level of being in that prominent of a place. So, you know, where does it go? I mean, all of our parks are supposed to be, you know, kind of semi-rural, contemplative places. You know, I do think that art, I like that art stimulates discussion. And in that vein, it can go in lots of places, but I do think that, you know, we designed Three Pond to be a natural park. This is a bunch of concrete. I'm not sure if that's the right place to put it.
If it's the, well, it's too late for that.
I mean,
If it's the case that the commission isn't going to accept this piece in any park, that would have been very good feedback to give to the art commission.
Is it too late to make a motion?
I think part of it though, Emily, is a little bit of like, well, we don't know what we can and can't do, but it is a blurred line. Because, to your point, if we don't like this piece, it's hard, like, if the question only for the commission is, can it go in there, then regardless of what it looks like, it could be letters, it could be this, it could be whatever, our job is just to decide, can it go and fit in that park, right? Versus, if it's a little bit more subjective, where does it fit with the aesthetic? Do we like how it looks? Do we like how it integrates with the park? Then that's a whole separate discussion, and part of it, I think what we need to know is like a little bit what our options are. If it is our option to say, we don't want it in this park, no thank you, we aren't gonna put it in any of our parks, you can leave it where it is, or we're done with it, kind of
Yes.
thing.
And I apologize, because I will do a better job next time of sort of setting the table in the memo and saying you could, here, maybe the best way to say it is including alternate motions in the memo. So PTRC could approve it in this park, or in this location, PTRC could approve it, or suggest that it go in another location in this park, PTRC could suggest that it go in a different park, or PTRC would not like to place this piece in any parks. Those are all options that are on the table for you.
And personally, I think this is such a beautiful, in nature, just in a natural state, Cherry Hills, with its trees, its open spaces, everything. I personally don't want to see a ton of art being put up. I don't think it even goes with the aesthetics of our community. I don't know where that line got blurred in the first place. So so for me, I'd rather see nothing go up than.
Is there a way to talk to them, because I would hate to get too far down, they're looking at a piece for John Mead Park. We don't want to get it too far down the road where they buy it, bring it to us, and we're like.
Oh, there is no danger of that happening, don't worry.
Okay.
So they haven't even started the process of looking at the way that their process works is Kendall Peterson, their consultant, starts by looking at different artists that she thinks might be a good fit. The art commission looks at all the artists, they sort of narrow that down to a few, they start to look at those few artists' pieces more in depth, start to look at what they can afford in their budget. So it's a long process on their end, and that's the part where I said staff had started to have internal conversations about this, but it was pre-COVID when we thought that this was going to be happening, so those have stalled. But we had talked about having a series of joint meetings between PTRC and the Art Commission as that process went on to try to make sure that they didn't get too far down one road, even to start talking to an artist, that PTRC would look at their art and say, this just isn't going to fit with our park.
But it seems like, to Kate's point, they're a little bit of a hammer looking for a nail. For an art commission, we need to find the next thing to put in somewhere, we'll figure out where it goes after, but let's just find a piece. Versus, hey, we have this brand new park, maybe there might be something that is apropos to put in the park that is art and, kind of reverse engineer it, rather than saying, all right, what's next, let's get another one in here somewhere.
No, well, to Rob's point earlier, art and John Mead had been discussed way back at the beginning of the John Mead Park master planning process. So that conversation had started 6 to 7 years ago. So it isn't that they just saw the new park and they were like, great, we needed a new spot to put our next thing that we wanted to get. It was contemplated at the beginning of planning for the park that the Art Commission and PTRC would work together to place the piece. We're just finally at that point years later.
So like I said, I think my recollection of the master planning process was that the citizenry did not want to have a sculpture garden. But
That's correct.
we did say that the master plan could include art. And, this was in furtherance of that request. I guess we still need to figure out just, how many pieces do we think we want to see in, and maybe perhaps give some guidance as to where, because that could also influence the type of piece. If we think that, there are 5 really good locations, they can go find art that kind of is tailored to those locations.
And she made the comment that she wanted to see a piece where the sundial was, it's not there now, and then also on the southwest corner of Quincy and University, although that's the HOA, I think, for Cherrymore that takes care of that corner.
No, so she misspoke. She meant where the James Searles piece was, which is actually City Park, which is a park.
Right,
and you all had approved that. So City Park and the opposite corner where Sundown was,
right.
or where the bus stop is really the, because Sundown was closer to this building.
Yeah. I think we just need to sort of slow the process down here. I get the feeling that Art Commission is just, we have too much art right now, I think.
I think that's outside the purview of PTRC.
I'm sorry?
I think that's outside the purview of PTRC.
Well,
Except as it
Unless-
pertains
unless
to
it's in our
placing
parks.
additional art in parks.
That's correct. They brought you art in a park tonight and you rejected it. So I don't think that suddenly art is going to appear in all of the parks. They typically have the budget to acquire one piece per year. So I'm not quite sure how much slower you want them to go.
well,
Are they acquiring or are they renting? It's not both.
It depends. They have two programs. So sometimes they'll acquire a piece and then they have a sculpture on loan program, which is an every other year program. So there was the sculpture that was out front of this building, the Relay sculpture.
No,
Yeah.
I know. But
And
the-
now
the-
that's been replaced.
The
So that's,
difference being over the course of a decade, if they're acquiring pieces every year.
Yeah.
you know, well,
they don't necessarily acquire a piece every year.
Well, they're trying to- I think they're also trying to amass funds that they can do a Charlo type that is far more than the $25,000 or the $21,000. That, you know, they may go a number of years in hopes that they can get a pristine piece. And
Yeah.
then they may, you know, to us, it looks like hibernating, but to them, they're amassing funds for the next one. So, you know, I do think that the Arts Commission is a important part of the village. It's just, it's very difficult because the only place that they can put whatever they acquire is in public open space, whether it be right-of-ways or parks. And so it creates a tension that if they're going to be given a mandate to go do what they do best, then we have to understand that it isn't productive to just turn around and stop.
For the record, I totally tried to get the Arts Commission to go in this other direction where they did performing arts rather than just focusing on painting and sculpture, like hire bands, have shows, that kind of programming. So I was not on the Arts Commission, but I did have their first ever concert series as a piano player, and I guess we need to try harder. They're fixating all their efforts on this art.
With all due respect, they are also having a watercolor competition and exhibit right now. So I would encourage you to be respectful to your fellow commissioners.
I also think that they are,
I respect
there are
that.
people, there are residents who enjoy art,
Yes.
and they would maybe echo the same thing about our parks and trails.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to remember that our residents all have things they like and dislike, and our job as commissioners for parks and trails is to protect that, so we can take the art as it comes to us and see how we assess it. The only reason I brought it up, Emily, was more of, I just don't want them, because they're fellow commissioners, I don't want them to do a whole bunch of work or do anything where we could have worked together earlier on to come up with a good solution for both commissions, rather than them work very hard and then kind of come in with, and so that way they know what to come in with for us and things like that. That's why I brought it up, so.
And I think that it might be helpful, so knowing the initial discussions that they were having a couple of years ago about starting to think about pieces for John Mead, what they had talked about were things that were more traditional, so not like super modern art type sculpture, and things that were more interactive. So to everyone's point this evening, that it would be okay if kids climbed on it. It would be okay if, you know, you could walk up to it and touch it. Like, it wasn't going to be something that wasn't appropriate and casual and comfortable to be in a park with kids. But I think it might be worth it to try and see if we can schedule something with both commissions together right off the bat, so that you guys can have that expectation setting conversation as early in the process as we can. So I'll talk to Jessica and Laura about getting something like that scheduled.
Wonderful, thank you, Emily. All
I
right,
have one quick comment. Back to the question of the winter festival. Emily had asked if we had any questions or comments, and a couple of us, I think, maybe more of us have given comments. I do think that what Emily has conveyed to me is that there is some thought about how we can reconfigure this winter festival. So, and what activities can go on and things like that. And so between now and when we do have that discussion about what it ought to be, I want to encourage all of us to take some time to think about it, so that we can come on for a good discussion.
anything further? All right, it is 7:18, so we'll adjourn the meeting. Hey, Emily, can I ask you a question?
Sure.